And last night I was on a walk and out in nature. I always get beautiful downloads. God is good to me there on our walks. What is trauma? And so I wrote this and I said, what I know of trauma is that it has a root cause, it has an age, it has an emotion, it has a place it's stored in the body, it has a story, it has a memory, it carries pain, and it leaves a legacy.
All right. Well, hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining us again for the next episode of the Flourish podcast. Again, we're here with Sandra, and I'm sure many of you really enjoyed. I know I did. I learned a lot, and just listening to Sandra share her story about recovery from trauma and healing from trauma. It's an ongoing journey. It's an ongoing process. And so if you missed it, please do tune into the last episode. And today we're going to continue the conversation. I know at the end of our last conversation, we were chatting about, things that you have uncovered around the healing journey. What does it mean to heal? And, there's so much more that could be said. But, as you have leaned into this area of trauma, and that it's a very popular word today. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but I see people who have had pretty significant experiences with trauma. And I'm sure you maybe even more. And so what are you learning these days about trauma? Because, what we hear in pop culture isn't always what's actually happening, right? Yeah.
Well, the definition of it, I know initially, like with PTSD, that came from wartime situations or tragic fires or car accidents or things like that. And it started to be in the everyday realm. I love Gabor Mate as my mentor to who I work, study with and follow for trauma. And he speaks to it as being the way that you're left after something happens. So
okay.
There was a podcast I listened to of his where he's like, somebody got hit with a baseball and that was the wound.
Right.
And the trauma was the concussion and the months of recovery afterwards from the brain injury.
Right.
And
so the wound and the trauma are not necessarily the same.
Right. Yeah. And so I believe that too. And so for me, a trauma is a thing that happens that changes the potential of who you could be.
Okay. Yeah.
So, as a child, I spoke earlier about getting quiet and getting mute because I needed to become small and invisible. And so that changed the potential of who I could be. Mm-hmm. And so that would be a traumatic event. Yeah. In my language prior, because trauma is newly being used, as the tag word was wound, or in PRH, it's called a pocket of pain. So and I like it sits in us, right? Like it's something that sits in us.
Right.
And last night I was on a walk and out in nature. I always get beautiful downloads.
That's awesome.
Yeah. God is good to me there on our walks. And what is trauma? And so I wrote this and I said, what I know of trauma is that it has a root cause, it has an age, it has an emotion, it has a place it's stored in the body, it has a story, it has a memory, it carries pain, and it leaves a legacy.
Okay.
And it seemed to wrap up for me how I go about helping people to uncover. Root cause is a big deal. We go back to that first story. So something that I experienced today as a disappointment or a broken promise, and I misbehave in that, or I have this response that looks mostly childlike, is I have to go back to the first time that I was disappointed.
Okay.
And that's where we can start to process that. And that's where I speak to the age piece. It's like, well, if I was disappointed for the first time, I was 10 years old, and nobody walked me through that, languaged that, supported that, believed that for me at 50 years old with the same wound of being disappointed, it will look like I'm a 10-year-old little girl that has emotionally not been able to process that. So that's where I speak to it having an age.
An age, yeah. And what else was significant for you there in that download? Because I think that's important, right? So for walking, something comes to you, and there's always, I think, more when you start to pull on those threads of it, right?
Yeah, so there's the root cause and then the age in which it happened. And then it's really important to name. Naming the trauma is, again, the language comes into the piece, but I had a particular incident in my own life where I had I thought it was a disagreement with a neighbor, and the relationship ended after that conversation, and there was no place for redemption. There was no forgiveness. There was nothing left there. And I went to therapy about that, and she said, oh, well, you were dismissed. And, Sandra, if we go to your root cause, you were dismissed a lot in your life. And there was something about that was wrong. I did some journaling. And I was in fact dismissed, but it wasn't going away. The pain of that relationship just ending like that, it didn't go away. So I said to her, no, that's not it. And it turned out to be discarded.
Okay. And
discarded nailed it. It was more, dismissed was that she didn't agree with my opinion. Discarded was I was no longer of value to her.
Right.
And so again, we went back to the root cause. And in that particular session, I had the recollection again of not being wanted, and that my mom wanted to discard me. There was thoughts of aborting me in her pregnancy. And so it was really visceral. I had a really physical response to that. And so it was about the naming. So to heal the dismissed wasn't all the way through to the wound. And sometimes it's in layers. We have to do the dismissed wound before we can get to the feeling absolutely discarded wound. So it's naming that emotion is crucial. The place that it's stored in our body is relevant. In that story, I got a headache. I was speaking of that, and I had this visceral pain in the back of my head because of the confusion of not being wanted, but having to be here and live in that experience anyways. The stories that you tell yourself because of the experience that you had. Again, that I'm not valuable, I have nothing to share or speak of, especially in misbehaviors. They're called disproportionate reactions. And what I teach and help people understand is misbehavior equals pain. Misbehavior doesn't mean you're a bad person. And the degree of your misbehavior is the degree of the pain that you've incurred. And so something that's really big, physically harming somebody, or some of our prison systems, well, all of our prison systems really are probably people that have unhealed trauma.
For sure.
And their pain just got bigger than what they could manage. And so it was in a behavior that they got that out rather than in a healing journey. So it's important to name it, and then to, and again, this is a witness piece where somebody tells you what a appropriate behavior is, or what's the other way that you can deal with that. And when people have strong emotions like anger or aggression, I always speak to, we don't want to know what that's about. I don't know, why are you being that way? What happened to you? I want to know what's hurting you. And that again is the language that I teach in the heart centering, is what hurt you.
What hurt you?
And then again, it takes away from the behavior.
Right.
And then, the way that we carry pain and legacy, I have been, it's my mission to end as much as I can in terms of the generational trauma of legacy, of poverty, of addiction, of, well, even divorce. That wasn't something that I ever wanted my children to experience. It wasn't something that I had hoped to experience. Yeah. But in that, I hope, and that's a process too. It's only 4 years new to me about that, and there's still pain around that, and still more layers of forgiveness. And again, the layering in our journeys, in our healing, because I was upset one day. My therapist said to me, well, that sounds like a mommy wound. And I said, oh, please, we've done the mommy wound. I already did the mommy wound. And she's like, but at every point in your life, you would need a mother for a different reason. So in your teens, you need a mother to do this. In your 20s, you need a mother to guide you through engagements and getting married. In your 30s, you need a mother to help you raise your children. And so that happens too, where the same wound will have to be looked at in several realms. In your personal life versus your business life, that looks different.
Yeah.
It's very insidious trauma.
Yeah. Well, and it's tough because when we're talking about even the idea of naming it, like the kind of courage it takes to go deep in yourself with help, but still you got to do it, to really try to uncover what is it? I feel angry, I feel hurt, I feel sad, I feel whatever, but, to get specific, to try to really put your finger on, what is it, the difference between being discarded or dismissed, right? And it might seem like, well, that's just semantics, but it's a different mechanics psychologically. And it's a big difference in terms of how you see yourself and see the world, right?
Correct.
So right now you are very busy, very active doing this work. I know that to be true because we work together also. And I'd love to have you share with the audience, what are you doing? Who are you serving? Who are you helping? We believe that everyone should have the opportunity to work in a flourishing workplace. For so many, the workplace drains them and drags them down, rather than being a place where everyone belongs, everyone is valued, and everyone thrives. When you have a workplace like that, not only will it be positive, productive, and profitable, but you will be contributing to the mental health and well-being of every single person on your team. At Flourishing Workplace, we are changing the world by changing the workplace. Book a discovery call today and find out how we can help you create a workplace where everyone belongs, everyone is valued, and everyone thrives.
It's interesting, again, what God brings to me. So when I first started this process, someone asked what my specialty was, and I said anything but addiction. That was what I knew.
Right.
And then God sent me addicts. And again, that was the mirror. My mother was an addict, and I had not done my healing work there. I had not yet forgiven her. And what was I going to do with this person that came and sat in my office and chose a bottle of booze over going to their kids' dance or paying their mortgage or things like that? So I don't think there's any coincidence to the way that my life has unfolded and journeyed. There was another coincidence where I got to work with little criminals. My little criminals are my favorite.
Right.
One of my kids that was just coming to me as therapy shoplifted. And she ended up in a program with our Edmonton police, and they have a diversion program, and they said, instead of arresting you, we'll put you in this program. They offered her counseling, and she said, well, I have a counselor and I want to use her. And so from then, now I have a tribe of little criminals. And it's remarkable. They really teach me a lot.
I bet.
And they keep me relevant.
Yes.
With language and street names of things. And so they keep me young. Yeah. They're somebody that teach me, or, I meet people where they're at. And so I can get down with the kids. We have snacks, we cook, we do things. They're not necessarily sitting in my office being asked, how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
I have my animals in my office, so they do that. So a good percentage of my work is with children.
Okay.
It has its limits because they get sent home to their environment.
Yes.
If the parents aren't doing the work, then they can only go as far as parents will allow.
It's very difficult.
There is actually a place, where it gets to be a little frustrating, because maybe frustrating isn't the right word, but parents really are the weakest link. And I am a parent. And so I say that with some humility. When the kids come and they have an experience of me, if I teach them to learn to speak for themselves or to create boundaries or ask for their needs to be met, in some situations they would go home to danger. And I know that would have been my experience as a child. If I would have said that's unfair or spoke to that I wanted or needed something, that it would have caused a beating or some kind of discipline or punishment there. So that's the thing that's hard on my heart with the kids.
Yeah, it's very difficult, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I know you work with more than children, so you also would work with adults.
I do work with adults.
Both women and men?
Yes. And I'm really pleased to say that my male clientele is expanding and expanding and expanding.
Wow. Okay.
There's a lot more men.
That's awesome.
That are coming to get help, and that's really exciting.
That's very exciting.
Me. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, obviously, your confidentiality, but just, what's happening with men that you're seeing right now?
The men, this particular group, it seems to come in waves, that I get children, and then I get addicts, and then I get nurses, and then I get a whole bunch of things. But right now it is the men. Usually they get hauled there by their wives in couples therapy.
Yeah. Or somewhere.
And so not necessarily walk in my door freely, but they on their own come back and make that decision to do some of their work. And with the couples, I work with couples really differently. I see the wife, the husband, and then the couple together. I don't just see the couple. My experience is that in couples, 10% of the problem is in the couple, and 90% of the problem is the trauma and the unhealed parts of the individuals. And so that's where it starts, will be with a couple, but then they get their individual session and they get to share their side of the story. And what's remarkable is that the stories, they would think that they're living two different marriages. In two different marriages, the stories are so alike.
Wow.
They're just from masculine and feminine, and they're from a place of where they have either failed or feel like their needs haven't been met.
Yeah.
But the men are doing, when they come, the ones that I'm getting, they do their work, they do their homework, and it is a requirement for me. Homework is mandatory.
Yeah. Well, it's really cool. I think for a long time, men, at least my observation was sort of like, well, I'm a man, can I have experienced trauma? And of course, I think we're way beyond that now. And yet I think it does take a unique type of counselor to work with men, because men they're difficult on some levels. On the other hand, there's so much beauty and so much brilliance in men when they choose to open themselves up to it, right? And not get caught in those old patterns, right? But it takes a while to unwind that, I imagine.
It does. Men work a lot from logic and intellect.
Yeah.
And my goal is to bring the tissue out and have them shed a tear.
That's awesome. At least one.
At least one, just one. At the end of the day, my kids will say, what makes a good day for you? And I said, lots of Kleenex being used. And yes.
Some ugly cries mixed in there.
Crying, right? Yes.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Again, your website, Sandra's website is sandramethod.com. And I would really encourage you, I don't say this lightly, but I do know for sure that people would be in good hands if you were to send them her way. Both women and men. And I love the fact that you're working with children. And we know that legally that's like anyone under 18, but you're working with teens. I mean, these are really young adults, right? And children too. And, right now we all understand the challenges that the school system is facing, and young people. I think it's tough to be a kid today.
It really is.
I can't imagine, right?
And COVID really did a number on our kids. That's the place where we will forever be paying for that.
And I want to confirm, I heard that again this week. I mean, it's amazing. I think for a lot of us as adults, because we had so many years without it, and okay, we're shut down for a few years, but for these kids at that critical moment, it actually has had a profound impact on them. So any final thoughts today that you'd like to share? Love where this conversation has gone.
Be brave. It's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. I mean, I'm my own poster child for where a person can come, for sure. Yeah, and it pays forward, and it pays forward, and it pays forward. It is that thing where when you help somebody to heal, they help someone to heal.
Right on.
Not even on purpose, just with compassion.
It's the nature.
And a new understanding of themselves.
Right on. Well, and I'm so excited because in our next episode with Sandra, we have the privilege of one more, at least for today. And we're going to be talking, or she's going to be sharing about the program that she's built. And we have the privilege of working in partnership with her on that. It's called TIFCOM. We call it TIFCOM. It's Trauma-Informed Flourishing Coaching. And, I really encourage you to tune in for our next episode, where Sandra is going to have an opportunity to share about that. I think that there's a lot of coaches who may be working in the space, frankly, a lot of leaders, even managers, supervisors, even, social workers, even people who are in the people helping space day to day, but they're really not trauma informed. And, we're not trying to necessarily make counselors out of everybody, but if we can give you more useful information, it will help you to do more good than harm and to help more people to heal. And so I'm really excited about that. So make sure you tune in, and thank you, Sandra, for your time today.
Thank you.
All right.